series of sermons is, if God, or anyone else for that matter, were to come to you and say, so you claim to be a Christian, could I see some identification? What forms of ID would you show them? How could you prove to them out of your life that you truly are a child of God? And we've been talking about the fact that really our only identification marks are the fruit of the Spirit in our lives. And so we've been each week taking a different one of these from Galatians 5:22, and now today we move to 5:23, and we're talking about gentleness today, the next to last fruit of the Spirit. Now I want you to remember that this fruit, all 9 of them together, have to do with how we deal with each other. This is not about our relationship with God. This fruit is the result of our relationship with God. They say to everyone around us, you know what? Jesus Christ really does make a difference. He makes a big difference. And what this fruit of the Spirit will do is take Christianity out of the talk realm and put it into the realm of walk. And so just so we can catch up and make sure everybody's on the same page, since we're at the very tail end of these today, or nearly so, let's just recap for a second. These are the ones we studied and the definitions we've given to you from what Paul said here in Galatians chapter number 5. The first fruit of the Spirit was love. Remember? We said that love is loving other people like God loves us. And then the second one was joy. We said that joy was an attitude of deep-seated fulfillment and contentment. Pardon me. It's allergy stuff. I'm not contagious or anything. And remember that the differentiation of joy and happiness is that happiness is an emotion. Joy, we found out, is really an attitude. And then peace was the third one. And peace is knowing everything is under control when it feels like everything is out of control. The peace of God. Patience, the ability to control your anger when dealing with other people. Anybody made you angry in the last 3 or 4 Sundays or weeks? Yeah. Anybody? Am I the only one? People made me angry? Well, how did you handle it? Did you handle it with patience? I hope so. Kindness, desiring the good of others with a sweet disposition. Goodness, we took these two together in one sermon because they're so closely related, and in one sense they're worlds apart. Goodness is avoiding wrong and doing what is right. Remember, goodness was moral, kindness is social. And then last Sunday we talked about faithfulness, or really a better translation of that is trustworthy, because it literally means being reliable and true to your word, or worthy of another's trust. So that's where we've been so far, and today we're talking about gentleness. Now this word gentleness that Paul used here is an interesting word. In fact, in English translations, it gets a couple of terms get juggled a lot for this word that Paul used. Gentleness, which is in the text I'm using, but also some of your translations may say meekness. Gentleness and meekness, the same thing. In Paul's day, this particular word, gentleness, was not a word that was valued much by the Greeks or the Stoics because they saw it as a sign of weakness. But I just want to tell you this morning that gentleness or meekness is not weakness. In fact, I can prove that to you very quickly. The Bible gives us 2 definitions of 2 men, both of them described as meek or gentle, and let's just see what it means of what we know about their lives. For instance, Numbers 12:3 says Moses, the man Moses, was very meek. There's the idea, more than all the people who were on the face of the earth. You know much about Moses? If you know much about Moses at all, would you say that as an individual and of character, was he strong or weak? He was strong, wasn't he? Took a lot to lead those people, the children of Israel at that time. He was very strong, and yet the Bible describes him as the most meek man on the face of the earth at the time. Matthew 11, Jesus is giving us a description of himself. And remember when he said, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest? Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am," and here's the word, "gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." Interpretation by voting was, how many of you think Jesus was strong? Anybody think Jesus was weak? Never was he weak. He was always strong. And so weakness and meekness and gentleness, not the same thing. In fact, I would suggest that gentleness is the exact opposite of weakness. Let me give you a definition of this. Gentleness, we could describe this morning as strength or power, but it's under control. Strength or power under control. It's not the absence of strength or power or even authority, but it is those things under control. Now, this word that Paul uses here in the Greek was actually used to describe animals at the time that had been domesticated or tamed. When I'm thinking of animals that great strength but under control, the first thing I think of is a racehorse. Is anybody here into horse racing? Nobody. I'm telling you, I could not care less about horse. No, I've really tried. I couldn't care less about horse racing. The Kentucky Derby comes around and all that stuff, and I just couldn't care less about any of that stuff. But I am very impressed. I go to the rodeo out here every year, as most of you do, and boy, when those horses start kicking and bucking, it just says to me one thing: power. Incredible power. In fact, I even went online this week and did a search just trying to figure out how you could find out how much power the average kick of a horse would have in it, and I just came up empty. I don't even have a clue how you would do that. I know they describe things in horsepower and all of that, but I don't know how they come up with those equations they use to do that. But it's powerful, a horse. But I do know that when you put a bit in that horse's mouth and you make it go only where you want it to go, it's incredible power, but in that moment, it's what? It's under control. Paul's word here would be that's a gentle animal at that point. It's power under control. The other animal I thought about was the elephant. Oh, isn't that a cute? Oh, everybody say, oh. Oh, just gives you the warm fuzzies. I remember when Wendy and I first got married, we were living in Wichita, and Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey Circus would come out to the Kansas Coliseum every couple of years or so, and so we would go out there. And I remember walking through the elephant tents out in where they housed the animals when they weren't performing, and I really do. I remember seeing a stake into the ground with a rope tied around one of the elephant's legs, and I always thought at the time, what is keeping that stake in the ground? Doesn't the elephant know it could go anytime it wanted to? And so I researched that a little, and you probably already know this, but they say that when they want to train an elephant like that, what they do is when it's first born, they put a rope around its foot, and then they tie that rope to something that won't move. It will not give way, something very solid. And then, of course, as nature would indicate, when that elephant's tied to it, it begins to kick and try to get away, and it can't go anywhere, and that gets conditioned in its mind that whenever something's around its foot, it can't get away. To the point then when it's older, at a circus, in the tent, they can just tie that rope to a tent stake, put it around that elephant's foot, and he thinks he can't move. Now, what is that? Elephants are powerful, but in that moment, that is power under control. And so that's exactly the word that Paul uses here. Aristotle got it pretty close, I think. He said that gentleness is a medium between a bad temper and spineless incompetence, between extreme anger and indifference. It's that control. It's not a lack of power, it's power under control. The gentle Christian, listen, the gentle Christian does not throw their weight around or assert themselves. Just as wisdom is the use of knowledge, gentleness is the right use of authority and power. And so let's talk about that this morning, because in the New Testament, there are at least two. Now, there are actually many more, but I just zeroed in on two because I figured that's all the time that we would have this morning. But two specific areas in which gentleness shapes the life of a Christian. So we're talking about the fruit of the Spirit, what it means to us, what it looks like in us, and here are at least two things that are indicated in the study of this word. First of all, gentleness means being teachable. Being teachable. And I'll be honest with you, until I dug into that and ran the word study on this week, I wouldn't have considered that to be necessarily a sign of gentleness, but it is. If you have a Bible with you, turn over with me to James chapter number 1. I want to show you a couple of things this morning. James chapter number 1. And if you don't have a Bible, no problem. It is coming up on the screen. James chapter 1. James says, therefore, verse 21, lay aside all filthiness and overflow of wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. Now, I like the New King James there. Listen to the New Living there. So get rid of all the filth and evil in your lives, and humbly accept the Word that God has planted in your hearts, for it has the power to save your souls. It's this idea in James 1:21 of being teachable, letting God's Word mold us. And I want to talk to you about that in just a minute. But I want to take this thought put it in two frames this morning to see if we can get our minds wrapped around it. Let me talk about this whole idea of being teachable practically for a minute. You know, it's a fact of life that if you ever get satisfied with what you know and you stop learning and growing, on the day that you do so, you actually start dying. You will start to slide backwards. It is so important that not just as Christians,